Tube. So this is a movie review for Chappie by Neil Blomkamp. And Chappie is a really fun robo movie where the robot becomes alive and self-aware. And from what you've seen in the trailers, you may have already gathered that it's kind of a mix of RoboCop and Short Circuit. And I definitely recommend checking out another review, a written review, which inspired this one by James Gesso of Reality Sandwich. You can go check out his written review on there. It got me started thinking about my own thoughts on Chappie, so I figured I would make this video. So it's kind of aesthetically a combination of RoboCop in the sense that it takes place in a near future city, Johannesburg, South Africa, where this character, what's his name, Dion Wilson, has developed these humanoid robots which will take the place of police officers and police the city and patrol the city and allegedly reduce or remove crime completely from the city. And according to the narrative in the story, this apparently is the first city to do that. So it's a kind of an interesting thing where, it's not happening in, downtown LA. It's not happening in New York or Chicago, like the older films where these things were going on in America. It's happening in Johannesburg, South Africa. And that's one of the really interesting points about this film that I'll get back to in a little while as to one of the good elements of it. So, aesthetically, the the cinematography was fantastic. The special effects were great. Chappie is mostly CG, I think, but he looks great. He looks so animated. I do believe that the actor, was it Charlton Copley, who plays Chappie, the guy who also played in Elysium and in District 9, he is great, and I believe he was, the blue screen kind of thing, doing the animations and things like that. So it's a very personalized robot. It doesn't seem fake. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't take you out of the film. It doesn't remind you that you're watching a CG character run around. You really kind of believe that he's there with the other actors and actresses. So that was really good about it. The cinematography also, the landscapes of the city, the action sequences, all of it was fantastic. But the problem that I had with Chappie was mostly the screenwriting here. So this is sort of not unique to Neil's career. Elysium was kind of a dud, I believe, in the box office, and was sort of panned by critics because of how jagged and sort of rough around the edges the screenwriting was. And it kind of shows, especially with his villains. Now, in Chappie, the villains are played by, well, the primary villain is Hugh Jackman, and he's a great actor. But I feel like the character that they wrote for him was a little two-dimensional, very similar to Jodie Foster's character in Elysium, where she's a little over the top and she's just too much of a bad guy to be a real bad guy, if that makes sense. She's a little too, And the same thing with this film. Hugh Jackman is a little bit too much of the angry ex-military guy who just doesn't like Dion and is working against him. I felt he was a little over the top. It wasn't as necessary. And the robot that he is developing as part of the plot, Hugh Jackman's character, Vincent Moore, is developing this human-controlled robot that looks straight out of RoboCop, the first movie. There's a great scene where it walks into the office in the RoboCop movie. It's a stop animation robot. It's funny how far we've come now, but it looks so close to that robot that I know it was an homage, but it just felt a little unoriginal, rather than being something that was, oh, this inspired me. On the contrary, though, Chappie himself was actually modeled after an anime series, and I'm going to leave in the notes section because I can't remember it offhand, and it's not in my notes. But there was an anime manga, an anime series in the 80s of this girl police officer and her robotic partner, which looks like a giant rabbit robot, and it's got the ears, and Chappie has the same thing. He's got the kind of twitchy antenna ears. So that felt more like an homage than the kind of straight ripping off of RoboCop. So these are all sort of minor points. Some of the bigger issues with the screenwriting was really just the fact that even though the world itself was beautiful, everything looked great, the CG was great, the aesthetic of the film, mind you, should probably mention this first, was really good. The aesthetic of the film was so cyberpunk. Uh, and by cyberpunk, if you're not familiar with this term, it was sort of developed in the 1980s. William Gibson is probably the most famous creator, imagineer of this sort of concept. But it's this idea of taking high technology's possibilities and then making it real in the real world and seeing what criminals would do with it, seeing what the sort of periphery of society would do with it. Really, really high tech, and then just sort of a dirty world where human problems happen around it and human responses go on with it. And that's very often crime, um, punk cultures, alternative cultures, sub-community, religion, all that kind of messy stuff that defines cyberpunk. I felt this film as an aesthetic really brought that out through, funny enough, the actors slash musicians, Die Antwoord, Ninja, and Yolandi. They may not be, I mean, some people have critiqued this movie for featuring them so much, but I felt they were very charismatic for what they were supposed to be. And the fact that they brought in their own kind of artistic, South African music and artwork and painting, you'll see in the sort of the background of a lot of the shots where their sort of criminal layer is. There's all of these paintings and stuff that's done by Ninja and maybe somebody else, I think someone else who helped him with his music videos. That kind of influence to me felt more organic, and it actually made it feel like a legitimate kind of cyberpunk movie. So I was just having a lot of fun. I feel like cyberpunk has been a kind of retro, I love the 80s, so I'm going to kind of celebrate this time period of imagining the future and William Gibson, Neuromancer, that kind of thing. I felt it was able to kind of resurrect that in a very novel and new way that's appropriate for, 2015, early 20th century tech where things are going now. It didn't feel retro at all. It felt great. It felt appropriate. It felt revived, and that was really cool. But again, that's the aesthetic. The plot. The plot had some problems. For instance, I'm kind of a geek with this stuff, so you'll have to bear with me. There's something called the hard problem of consciousness. And you may be like, oh God, where is he going with this? But in the film, Dion, who develops a self-aware robot through the plot, I won't go into the plot details too much, but he develops Chappie for various reasons. And literally, there's a montage of him at the beginning of the film where he's in his home with these little robots all over, these little servant robots helping him, and he's drinking energy drinks and typing away on his computer, and the file is just conveniently consciousness.dat, I believe, or consciousness.data, I think it's dat. It's literally just a file on a computer, and to me, that might be okay, for like an 80s film where you're kind of playing around very lightheartedly with this stuff. But to just sort of loosely toss that in there, like, oh, we solved consciousness. Consciousness is just a computer program that's really, really complicated. To me, that wasn't as believable, but that was forgivable. The part that really irked me was later on in the film where, okay, so here's a spoiler. Well, later on in the film, Chappie realizes that his maker, Dion, created him, but created him flawed. Chappie was picked, his robot model, before he was self-aware because he was a broken police officer robot who got his battery welded into his chest. So Dion went, well, okay, this one is going to be decommissioned anyway, so let me experiment with my consciousness AI program with this one. Well, Chappie became aware that he only has around 7 or 8 days to technically live. And so basically, Chappie is a robot who was created to die, which is sort of an analogy to, a theological question. Why did God create us only to have us die, to have us be mortal? Well, Chappie is mortal. His consciousness isn't perpetual. His computer program, once his battery runs out, he just goes. So that's sort of the conflict Chappie has to deal with. And while I did find it kind of interesting that he goes, all right, I can solve this, there's literally a scene where Chappie goes and takes a bunch of, looks like PlayStation 3 hard drives, piles them up, borrows some of his creator Dion's equipment, and then goes ahead and solves the hard problem of consciousness. He's able to map his consciousness onto the computer there. And then he's able to take Yolandi, a human, and map her consciousness and create an exact copy of it. So that later in the film, Chappie is able to save himself. He is, spoiler, he is able to save Yolandi, and he's also, again, spoiler, he's able to save Dion, who gets shot at the end of the film, who's dying. So he brings him on there, and he uses the computer program, and Chappie he solves consciousness. All right, we can do it. We can map a person onto a computer. Let's do it. We just need enough computing power. So that was sort of the answer. We just need enough computing power to do these things. Total hang up on my part because I'm just more, I studied philosophy of mind in undergrad. I've been sort of an enthusiast of those kinds of questions. I was hoping that since Neil Blomkamp is a more thoughtful director and writer, if you've seen Elysium, if you've seen District 9, those are thoughtful films. I was hoping that this wouldn't just do that. And I thought it wouldn't at first, because they did bring that problem up. Dion actually said, this is very complicated, Chappie. You can't do this. You can't just upload consciousness. You don't know what's really on that other end. You don't really know if I perpetuate or if it's a copy of me. The movie didn't bother with those things. Once everybody got resurrected, they acted as if they were them. They felt as if they were them, and that's all. But the issue is that Yolandi eventually, when she dies in the film, the copy of her consciousness, there's no continuity between the dead Yolandi and saving her consciousness and taking it out of her. She dies and she's buried, and there's an earlier copy of her mind sitting in a hard drive. That's what gets resurrected. So there's a sense of, is Yolandi really Yolandi, or is she just a copy? Is Chappie really Chappie, or is he now a copy? And then is Dion really Dion, or is he now just not just a copy, but a copy? Which is still an issue, because it means that you don't survive bodily death. Your consciousness, your experience of yourself doesn't survive bodily death, but someone else who's very like you and who is by all intents and purposes you, they will keep going. They'll go on, and maybe forever now if they can safely transfer their brain. Anyway, so I thought it was kind of interesting. And problematic at the same time, because there's a question of the soul and the essence. And I feel that Neil, in writing this script, was trying to say that something does get transferred beyond the body. And even the script, Yolandi is teaching him that, you have a soul, Chappie. Your soul is what can survive the transfer of body to body. And so there was a kind of interesting, almost esoteric dimension to the end of Chappie. But again, the screenwriting, it could have been a little bit more sophisticated, I feel, to carry the weight of those interesting arguments that Neil was putting at the end of the film about the soul, about the afterlife, about the other place, as Chappie was calling it, and Yolandi. So I feel like that would have been more interesting, but overall, it was a great film. It plays with the cyberpunk aesthetic in a new way. The fact that it's in Johannesburg is definitely cyberpunk. It's not happening in LA. It's not happening in New York or Chicago like in the RoboCop movie. It's happening in Johannesburg in a sort of center periphery switch, where the really interesting stuff for our science fiction future and the evolution of technology and this global artificial intelligence emergence is happening at the periphery of our consciousness and at the periphery of our cultures, in places we would least expect it to occur. And as a filmmaker himself, Neil is awesome, because he's literally coming from that world. He's coming from Johannesburg. He's coming from South Africa. He's celebrating the artists, and and I believe in great way to sum it up, as far as like a kind of cultural enthusiasm, Ninja was describing in the Boing Boing interview, which I'll also link here, that he was so excited to see the film because it was South African, and yet it was so Hollywood, and it was so, big blockbuster film. So that kind of combination, that other areas of the world can participate in this global science fiction, imaginative storytelling culture is really exciting. So even though Chappie had problems, I recommend that you go see it. I recommend that you watch it and share it with your friends. Despite the hangups, it was a lot of fun, and it was very thoughtful. And the impression of the film for me is more important necessarily than the sum of its individual technical parts and whether or not they worked. Because no film will be technically perfect, and if it is, it may not be Interesting. So anyway, thanks for listening, guys. And if you like this video, please subscribe and share and pass it along. And let me know what you thought about Chappie and what you thought about some of the things that I said in this video. Thanks, guys.